She goes by Dr. Cheyenne Bryant. She has hundreds of thousands of followers. She appears on major platforms. She offers guidance on mental health, relationships, and emotional wellness to people who are, by definition, in vulnerable moments of their lives. And when someone asked her to prove she actually has a doctorate, she said, "I'm not going to prove anything to anybody. My obedience is to God, not to people." That answer is either the most spiritually grounded response to a credentials question ever recorded, or it is the clearest possible signal that something here does not add up. This story is not about tearing someone down. It is about a question that matters whenever anyone uses a doctoral title to offer mental health guidance. What does that title actually mean? And what happens when you can't verify it? Dr. Cheyenne Bryant is a wellness influencer and self-described mental health advocate. She has built a significant public platform, a following, media appearances, and a brand built around emotional health guidance and counseling adjacent content. On her official platform, she states that she earned a doctorate in counseling psychology from Argosy University. That credential, if verified, would be significant. A doctorate in counseling psychology is a rigorous, multi-year academic achievement. It requires coursework, supervised clinical hours, comprehensive examinations, and the completion of an original doctoral dissertation, a piece of academic research that is reviewed, defended before a faculty committee, and permanently archived. People who hold that credential have earned the right to use the title doctor in professional context. And in the mental health space specifically, credentials matter because the title signals to clients and audiences that the person offering guidance has been trained, examined, and held to professional standards. That is the context in which this controversy erupted. The eruption started, as these things often do, on a radio show. Following Bryant's appearance on The Breakfast Club, commentators and what the internet calls credential sleuths started asking a straightforward question. Where is the documentation? A doctorate from Argosy University in counseling psychology should, by standard academic practice, leave a trail. A dissertation archived in a public database, a record in the university's former registry, a diploma, a committee, former professors, and classmates. None of that has been publicly surfaced. Bryant's response to the scrutiny addressed this directly, and her explanation hinged on one central fact. Argosy University did close. That part is true and verifiable. The for-profit university system collapsed in 2019 amid financial and regulatory problems, leaving thousands of students in difficult situations regarding their records. Bryant's specific claim was that a third-party company that had been holding Argosy's records only retained them for a 2-year window, and that window had passed, leaving her unable to retrieve her official transcripts. That explanation is at least plausible on its surface. The closure of Argosy University was genuinely chaotic, and record access has been a documented problem for students. But here is where the explanation runs into difficulty. The unavailable transcripts defense addresses one type of documentation. It does not address several others. Let's go through them specifically because this is where standard academic practice becomes important. First, dissertation repositories. When a doctoral student completes their dissertation at an accredited university, regardless of what subsequently happens to that university, the dissertation is submitted to ProQuest, a national database that permanently archives doctoral and master's theses from accredited institutions. This is standard practice. It is not dependent on the university remaining open. It is not affected by a 2-year record retention window at a third-party company. If Cheyenne Bryant completed a doctoral dissertation at Argosy University, that dissertation should be findable in ProQuest. Searches conducted by commentators covering this story have not surfaced. That is a specific concrete gap that the transcript's explanation does not cover. Second, personal copies. A doctoral dissertation is not a term paper. It is years of work, multiple drafts, committee feedback, revisions, defenses. It is the kind of document that exists in multiple forms. Digital drafts saved across years, email chains with advisors, printed versions, a bound copy submitted to the university, a copy the graduate keeps. The idea that someone would complete a doctoral program and possess 0 personal copies of their dissertation, no digital file, no printed draft, no bound copy, is, to put it plainly, highly unusual. Critics who have raised this point are drawing on standard academic experience, not on malice. Third, the response itself. When pressed on why she won't provide alternative proof, a diploma, a dissertation manuscript, testimony from her academic committee, Bryant said publicly, "I'm not going to prove anything to anybody. My obedience is to God, not to people." That framing, positioning credential verification as a spiritual test rather than a professional accountability question is worth examining carefully. Because the people asking are not asking out of personal hostility. They are asking because she uses a doctoral title to provide mental health guidance to a large audience. And in that context, the credential is not a personal achievement, it is a public claim that carries professional. Here is the part of this story that goes beyond one person's credential. The title doctor in a mental health context is not decorative. It signals something specific to the people receiving that guidance. It signals training, clinical supervision, examination by an academic and professional community, accountability to standards that exist outside the individual practitioner. When someone in a vulnerable moment, struggling with their mental health, their relationships, their emotional well-being, seeks guidance from someone using a doctoral title, they are making a reasonable inference. This person has been prepared, examined, and credentialed by a system designed to protect them. If that inference is incorrect, if the title does not reflect what it implies, the harm is not abstract. It is the real possibility that someone chose this person over a credentialed professional because the title made them seem equivalent. That is the public interest dimension of this story. It is also the reason that the use of protected professional titles, like psychologist or doctor in clinical contexts, is regulated in most states because the title does real work in the real world, and the people relying on it deserve to know it means what it says. Whether Cheyenne Bryant has a doctorate or not has not been determined by any legal or regulatory proceeding. That is important to state clearly. What has been determined by her own public statements is that she has declined to provide the forms of documentation to resolve the question, and that the explanation she has offered does not account for all the ways a legitimate doctoral credential would normally be verifiable. Here's the human dimension of this story. There are people in Bryant's audience who found her at difficult moments, who trusted her guidance, who may have made decisions about their mental health care, about who they sought help from, based in part on the credential her title implies. Those people deserve honesty, not cruelty, not a pile-on, but honesty, because the wellness space and the mental health content space specifically has a real documented problem with credential inflation, with people using titles that imply training they may not have. The blurred line between life coaching, spiritual guidance, and clinical mental health practice being exploited by people whose audiences don't always know to check the data. Bryant is not the only person in this space where these questions arise. She is the current example because she appeared on a major platform, because the question was asked publicly, and because her response generated its own controversy. But the pattern is larger than her. Understanding it is genuinely useful for anyone who consumes wellness and mental health content online. Here is what would resolve this. 1. Upload. A digital copy of the dissertation, a photo of a diploma, an email from a former Argosy faculty member confirming committee membership, a ProQuest record. Any one of those things would shift this conversation immediately and permanently. Bryant has said she will not do that. Her stated reason is spiritual, obedience to God rather than people. Whether that framing resonates with you or not, what it does not do is answer the professional accountability question, because that question is not personal. It is about what her title means to people relying on it. The story is not closed. No legal or regulatory finding has been made. If documentation emerges from any source, the picture could change. But right now, the gap between the claim and the verifiable evidence remains open. In the mental health space, open gaps in credential verification are not minor inconveniences. They are the thing the entire system of credentialing exists to prevent. Here is what you should take from this story, regardless of how it ultimately resolves. When someone uses a doctoral title to offer mental health guidance, you have the right to ask what that title means, not out of hostility, not as an attack, but as a reasonable consumer of information that affects your well-being. You can check ProQuest for a dissertation. You can ask what institution granted the degree. You can look up whether that institution was regionally accredited. You can ask whether the person is licensed, because a doctorate in counseling psychology, if practiced clinically, typically requires licensure that is publicly verifiable through state license. These are not complicated steps. They take minutes, and they are the difference between choosing a credentialed professional and choosing someone whose title implies credentials they may or may not hold. The Cheyenne Bryant story is unresolved. She has not been found guilty of anything by any court or license. She has made a public claim, offered a public explanation, and declined to provide additional documentation. What that means is something each person in her audience gets to decide for themselves. But they deserve to make that decision with full information, not with a title. Not with the spiritual deflection, with the actual facts, whatever they turn out to be. Let me know what you think.